She danced 50 sets a night in boots that deformed her feet. She smiled through a corset that cracked her ribs. She painted her face every single shift with powder that was 40% lead. Nobody told her. The contract she signed had already disappeared. The wages she earned went straight to a debt she never agreed to. When she died, a judge scratched her name out of the court record. A city clerk erased her from the census, and the wooden cross on her grave rotted away before anyone thought to replace it. You think you know what a saloon girl was. You don't. Here are 20 truths that prove it. Number 20. The shift that broke bodies before midnight. In Leadville, Colorado, during the silver boom of the 1870s, saloon girls did not perform. They labored. Payroll ledgers and theater programs from the era record a schedule that would be illegal in any modern workplace. 50 dances per night, each set lasting 10 minutes. No breaks, no sick days, no comp time. Hard-soled boots pounded sawdust floors for 6 to 8 hours straight, while corsets cinched the ribs so tight that medical records from the period document fractured bones just from the pressure of the garment. If you missed a set, you earned nothing for the night. But you still owed rent to the house for the room you slept in upstairs. Doctors working in frontier towns recorded what they called saloon feet, chronic deformities from repetitive impact on hardwood. They also recorded compressed lungs and permanent spinal curvature from years of corset wear. These women were not background decoration. They were running a physical gauntlet every single night, and the town kept the doors open and the music playing regardless of what it cost them. Number 19. The advertisement that was a trap. Recruiters did not go looking for desperate women. They advertised for them. Classified ads placed in Boston newspapers, in St. Louis church bulletins, and in immigrant community papers throughout the 1870s and 1880s promised young women respectable music work out west, steady wages, safe lodging, a fresh start. Some ads were discovered by historians and archived in the Library of Congress. They read like genuine job offers. The reality waiting at the end of the train ride was a contract that had already vanished, a debt ledger waiting at the depot with the woman's name already written in it, and a town so isolated that leaving on foot was not a realistic option. The Boston Globe ran warnings about these recruitment schemes as early as 1871. The warnings did not stop the supply chain. Desperation and hope are powerful enough to override common sense, and the saloon owners knew it. The further from home a woman landed, the less power she had. Distance was the real contract. Number 18. The names that were deleted from history. In museum storage rooms across the American West, parlor pianos and battered violins sit in wooden crates with accession tags that read, "Owner Unknown." These instruments were not abandoned. They were played by skilled women whose names were systematically removed from the historical record. Census records from Denver in the 1870s listed women as music teacher or pianist. By 1890, those same entries had been quietly changed. The new designations were boarder or servant. The skills vanished from the official record the moment they were no longer economically useful to the frontier economy. Historians examining the Adams Museum's collection in Deadwood found a piano cataloged simply as Saloon Piano, 1875. Nobody recorded who played it. Nobody thought it mattered. These were trained musicians. Some were classically educated. They were not props, and they were not unskilled laborers. They were artists whose identities were erased on purpose, because erasing them was more convenient than acknowledging them. Number 17. The orphan pipeline nobody documented. Orphan train manifests from the 1890s contain entries that read, when examined closely, as something closer to a labor assignment than a placement. Girls as young as 12 were documented in Kansas saloon towns, their names and ages recorded with the same bureaucratic precision used for livestock inventories. Parish aid rosters and Ellis Island ledgers from the same period include notations beside certain arrivals to agent or debt contract. Irish, German, and Scandinavian girls who arrived with no English and no family were handed directly to men they had never met in towns they could not find on a map, with obligations they did not fully understand attached to their names before they had even unpacked. The frontier economy required a constant supply of new faces. The orphan and immigration systems of the era provided them, not through conspiracy, but through the simple machinery of poverty, paperwork, and distance. Number 16. The railroad schedule that replaced free will. By the 1890s, the movement of saloon girls between boom towns was not random. It was coordinated. American Railway Association timetables, cross-referenced with mining payroll calendars, reveal a pattern that looks less like travel and more like logistics. Women were moved between Denver and Cripple Creek, between Deadwood and St. Louis, on 4-month cycles timed precisely to align with the next town's payday. Their train fares were deducted as fresh debt upon arrival. The cattle drive seasons and mining boom cycles dictated the schedule, not the women themselves. This rotation was deliberate. A woman who stayed in one town long enough built relationships, community, and leverage. The 4-month cycle prevented all three. It kept the workforce isolated, in debt, and dependent on the system that was profiting from them. The railroad did not just move goods west. It moved women through a circuit designed to keep them powerless. Number 15. The tuberculosis rate they never published. The rooms above the saloons were small, poorly ventilated, and shared. Sawdust floors absorbed everything and were rarely cleaned. In this environment, tuberculosis did not spread gradually. It detonated. Surgeon General mortality tables from the 1890s show women living in frontier lodging houses dying from tuberculosis at nearly double the national rate. 210 deaths per 100,000 compared to a national baseline of 110. City officials were aware of the numbers. The women in those rooms represented revenue through fines, licenses, and medical exam fees. Emptying the rooms would have meant emptying the budget. So the beds stayed full, the ventilation stayed poor, and the death rate stayed high. The official response was not to address the conditions. It was to require the women to pay for their own quarterly medical examinations, which brings us to the next entry. Number 14. The medical exam that was a tax. The Territorial Act of 1881 in Arizona required every woman working in a saloon to submit to a medical examination once per quarter at her own expense. Missing the appointment carried a $10 fine, roughly equivalent to 2 weeks of earnings. Court dockets from Tombstone document these penalties being enforced with what one historian called bureaucratic enthusiasm. The city physicians split their examination fees directly with the municipal government. This arrangement was not incidental. It was written into the ordinance. What was publicly described as a public health measure was, in practice, a revenue stream. The examinations identified sick women who were then removed from work, which cost them income and often their lodging. The system ensured that the most vulnerable women paid the most, while the city collected money on both ends. Number 13. The secret families the records hid. parish registers from Catholic and Protestant churches across the West contain an anomaly that only becomes visible when cross-referenced with federal census records. The same woman appears in a baptism record as a mother, or in a marriage record as a wife in the church register, and simultaneously appears in the federal census as a boarder or servant with no family quoted. A baptism record from Leadville in 1898 names a saloon worker as the mother of a baptized child. The federal census taken the same spring omits her from the household entirely. Guardianship papers filed in Deadwood probate court show wages being sent to addresses in Missouri and Ohio, to children whose existence the women kept entirely hidden from their employers. The double life was not weakness, it was strategy. These women were protecting something from the system that owned almost everything else about them. Number 12. The line drawn through the city. In 1880, the city of Dodge City formalized what had been an informal practice by writing it into municipal ordinance. A boundary was established, a 4-block district on the south side of the tracks. Vice was legally permitted within this zone and prohibited everywhere outside it. Women who crossed the deadline, as it was called in newspaper accounts of the era, risked arrest, fines, and removal. Respectable businesses were formally prohibited from serving women identified as working inside the district. The city did not merely tolerate the saloon economy, it zoned it, contained it, and enforced its geography with the same legal machinery used to build roads and license merchants. The deadline turned city planning into a tool of control. The map of Dodge City in 1880 is, among other things, a map of who was allowed to exist, where. If history buried these women once, subscribe to Hidden History Files. We make sure it doesn't happen twice. Number 11. The Cargo Manifests. San Francisco shipping records from the 1870s contain entries for Chinese women that do not read like passenger lists. They read like inventory. A manifest from 1876, examined in detail by historians at the California Historical Society, lists 18 Chinese females between a shipment of tea and a consignment of silk fabric. No names, no ages, just a tally. Local newspapers of the period ran classified advertisements announcing the arrival of Chinese women in language that, by any modern standard, describes the sale of human beings. These women had no legal right to testify in American courts. They could not claim citizenship. For those who escaped, the route led through mission houses, and the intake ledgers of those missions document, in careful handwriting, names, ages, and the conditions in which these women were found. For every entry in those ledgers, historians estimate 10 more women left no record at all. Number 10. The rescue that was also a trap. Mission houses throughout the West were publicly celebrated as sanctuaries. In practice, Chicago branch ledgers from the Florence Crittenton mission document a system that looks considerably less like charity. Women who entered the mission were required to sign intake forms. The forms, examined in mission archives, include clauses specifying that all future earnings belonged to the mission for an unspecified period. Food, lodging, and what was listed as moral instruction were deducted from wages that had not yet been earned. A new name was frequently assigned upon entry, replacing whatever name the woman had arrived with. Leaving required formal permission from the mission's board of directors. Conversion to the mission's denomination was mandatory, not optional. For women escaping genuine danger, the mission was a real improvement. But the improvement came at a cost that bears examination. The system of debt and control did not end at the saloon door. Number 9. The courtroom that erased voices. A Wyoming County court docket from 1887 contains a notation beside a saloon girl's attempted testimony that reads, in the judge's own handwriting, her word inadmissible. The case involved an assault. The accused was acquitted. The woman's account was stricken from the record, and the trial ended in a mistrial. Newspaper coverage described the scene with clinical detachment, referring to the witness only as being of a certain class, a phrase that functioned in the legal language of the frontier as a complete removal of credibility. Across the West, courtrooms operated under a practical rule that was never formally written into statute, but was consistently applied. If a woman worked in a saloon, her testimony carried no legal weight. When the law declares that a category of people cannot speak in their own defense, the violence committed against them becomes consequence-free. That is not an incidental feature of the system. It is the system. Number 8. The woman who built an empire and vanished. Pearl DeVere arrived in Cripple Creek, Colorado, in the early 1890s. Probate records from Teller County document her estate at the time of her death at $3,200, an amount that placed her among the wealthiest individuals in the district. Her inventory included velvet drapes, mahogany furniture, and a business that generated more annual income than most men in the town. The Cripple Creek Chronicle published her funeral notice the morning after her death at 34. The cause was listed as a morphine overdose. The funeral drew a crowd larger than any civic parade the town had held. Her burial was private. Her grave was left unmarked. Within weeks of her death, city minutes had been amended to remove her name from the ledgers where it had appeared. Pearl DeVere was, for a brief period, the most successful businesswoman in one of the wealthiest towns in the American West. History remembered her as a footnote. Number 7. The deed that meant nothing. St. Louis property records from 1892 contain the name of a woman listed as the sole owner of a 3-story brick building on a commercially valuable street. The deed is signed. The purchase price is documented. By 1897, the same property appears in county records again, this time carrying an encumbrance. By 1899, a foreclosure notice. A single line in the city newspaper archives closes the file. House sold at auction, proprietor absent. This pattern repeats throughout the archival record of the American West. For every whispered legend of a woman who made it, who saved enough to buy property and build something lasting, the paper trail reveals the same trajectory: ascent, vulnerability, collapse. The system did not simply fail to protect these women, it was structured to reclaim whatever they managed to accumulate. Number 6. The fines that paid for the sidewalks. Denver City Council minutes from 1885 contain a line that requires no interpretation. $1,725 were collected in fines from 138 women during the fiscal quarter. Those funds were allocated to municipal infrastructure. While the mayor was publicly denouncing vice from the podium of City Hall, the city's own financial records show that vice was subsidizing the construction of the streets he walked on. The 30-day mandatory medical exam rule, passed by the same council, generated additional revenue through examination fees split between city physicians and the municipal government. The moral outrage expressed in public statements was not hypocrisy in the casual sense. It was a deliberate performance. The city needed the revenue and needed the women to keep generating it, while simultaneously needing to be seen condemning them. The ledger makes this entirely clear. Number 5. The bottle on every shelf. Laudanum was opium dissolved in alcohol. In the 1870s and 1880s, it was sold legally in saloons for 25 cents a bottle and marketed in patent medicine catalogs as a remedy for pain, sleeplessness, and nervous exhaustion. By 1900, the United States Census estimated 267,000 habitual opiate users nationwide. Medical journals of the period estimated that women accounted for more than 60% of those addicted. For saloon girls, laudanum was available, cheap, and actively pushed by the establishments where they worked. It numbed the pain of the physical labor. It blunted the psychological weight of the work, and it made the workforce easier to manage. Addiction is an efficient control mechanism. A woman dependent on a substance sold by her employer is not in a position to walk away. The bottle on the shelf was not just a product, it was a policy. Number 4, the makeup that was poison. The vanity tables in saloon dressing rooms contained, by modern standards, a credible collection of toxic substances. Trade catalogs from the 1880s list white lead carbonate as the primary ingredient in face powder, present at up to 40% by weight. Lip color was derived from mercuric sulfide. Eye cosmetics contained antimony. Skin creams advertised arsenic as the active ingredient for achieving a fashionably pale complexion. Medical journals from frontier towns document case files involving women presenting with tremors, memory loss, and violent mood changes. The treating physicians attributed the symptoms to nerves or to the nature of the women's work. The actual cause, cumulative heavy metal poisoning absorbed through the skin in daily application, was not recognized until decades later. These women were being systematically poisoned by their own beauty routine, one shift at a time, and nobody in a position of authority connected the symptoms to the cause. Number 3, the fire and the empty column. When Deadwood burned in 1879, the city's newspapers covered the destruction in considerable detail. Rows of boarding houses reduced to ash, personal property gone in minutes. What the newspapers did not cover was equally significant. Insurance ledgers from the year of the fire show merchants and property owners filing claims and receiving compensation. Their losses were calculated, documented, and repaid. For the women who lived and worked in the rooms above the saloons, the ledger columns are blank. No claims, no payouts, no recovery, costumes, letters from home, personal savings kept in trunks under the bed because no bank would open an account for them. All of it gone with no recourse and no acknowledgement that any loss had occurred. The fire did not merely destroy property. It destroyed evidence that these women had ever existed in any material sense. When the town rebuilt, it rebuilt without them in the record. Number 2, the names in the private ledger. The loudest voices against the saloon economy in the American West were not infrequently the same voices appearing in private business records as regular customers. An account ledger recovered from an Abilene establishment and examined by Kansas state historians lists, in consistent handwriting, the names of the town sheriff, a sitting judge, and the editor of the local newspaper, all documented as regular patrons of the same establishment they publicly condemned in print and from the bench. A Kansas newspaper editor published the text of a sermon he had attended on a Sunday morning. That same edition contained a first-hand account of the preacher's visit to a dance hall the previous Saturday night. The machinery of moral condemnation required the continued existence of the thing being condemned. Without the saloons, the outrage had no audience. Without the outrage, the saloons lost the cover they needed to operate without real accountability. The system required both. Number 1, the unmarked row. In the Adams Museum in Deadwood, South Dakota, a diary sits behind glass. The pages are fragile. The handwriting is faded. The name of the writer has been scratched out so forcefully that the paper is nearly torn through at that point. The only legible passage historians have been able to confirm describes a Christmas night when the candles burned down and hope was gone. The burial register from Boot Hill in Deadwood, dated 1877, lists row upon row of graves in a section designated Ladies' Row. The cemetery plot map from that year shows a neat rectangle of marked plots. The wooden crosses that once stood there rotted away before anyone thought to replace them with stone. No family ever came to claim these graves. No headstone was ever commissioned. The women who filled that row had been recruited with promises, trapped by debt, poisoned by their cosmetics, silenced in court, erased from the census, and taxed by the city that depended on their labor. When they died, the final step was simply to let the markers disappear. The record ends where the crosses rotted. And that, more than anything else, is the truth Hollywood never told you.